Good evening and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at what's coming up today. A new virus outbreak in China, leading U.S. lawmakers to raise concerns over transparency, as a whistleblower reveals the CCP is trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation, what Congress is asking of the CDC. And countering Beijing's influence in Africa. President Biden hosting the Angolan president with a new announcement. But why is the visit being overshadowed by an unfulfilled promise? And how much does the federal government know about UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs? And who's keeping that information from the American public? Lawmakers today describing their efforts to declassify this heavily guarded secret. Lawmakers today raising transparency concerns over a new virus outbreak in China. A whistleblower recently telling our sister media, the Epoch Times, that the Chinese Communist Party is secretly ordering officials to downplay the outbreak, which is overwhelming hospitals throughout China. Reports now that this mystery pneumonia is now in the United States, in Ohio and in Massachusetts. Congress is now probing the CDC to find out how the agency is responding. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports from Capitol Hill.
Overwhelming many hospitals. Infections of this pneumonia are spreading quickly among children in China and have now even extended to adults, with medications being useless to help. Chinese reports indicate that the request for medical care is so high that Beijing has been forced to reopen makeshift hospitals just to cope. Here's what the CDC director had to say about this new virus when testifying before a House committee.
Correct. Not a novel virus. Again, we have been in close touch with our counterparts in China, and that information has been corroborated.
And you feel confident that China's being transparent with them as for the information that you have?
Well, I think, scientific diplomacy is incredibly important in that part of the world.
This comes as an insider account reveals that the rest of the world and even those inside China may be left in the dark about the reality of this new outbreak. A whistleblower told our sister media outlet, the Epoch Times, that the CCP leader Xi Jinping has actually ordered officials to downplay reporting of this new respiratory illness and to avoid using the term COVID-19.
They're not forthcoming. They don't want to lose face, and as a result, people die. And so we've got to keep an eye on it.
That being said, we still have the same problem we had in some sense with COVID, which is like the data coming out of China is so opaque, there's no transparency, and that's what makes it hard to analyze what the risk is beyond China's borders.
The Energy and Commerce Committee has asked the CDC to be on guard about this new outbreak and to better prepare to provide more transparency into the true nature of the virus.
They didn't tell us the truth during COVID. They held back on what was happening probably for weeks, if not months, which resulted in a worldwide pandemic. So I'm skeptical also about what's happening in China, and we need to know what it is.
Now, the Energy and Commerce Committee is requesting the CDC to answer a long list of questions on the virus by December 13th, including things such as if the CCP has tried to withhold or delay providing information about this virus, and what information, if any, has the CDC received from China on the virus. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
President Biden hosting the Angolan president today, seeking to weaken Beijing's influence on the African continent. Joining us now is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What was announced and what makes this meeting significant?
Good evening to you, Steve. So President Biden's meeting today with Angolan President Lorenzo comes as Biden is seeking to expand U.S. ties with Africa, where the Chinese Communist Party is also seeking to expand its influence. For example, Angola is already the biggest debtor in Africa to China, owing China some $40 billion in debt and having to pay back some of it using its oil. And now President Biden is presenting to these African countries U.S. investments under what's called the Lobito Corridor Project, which is an U.S. alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative that administration says how often turns out to be debt traps. Here's what President Biden is saying at the bilateral meeting today. Watch.
Africa, 1 billion people, critically important how it functions for the whole world.
África é continente de 1 bilhão de pessoas e é de importância crítica para o mundo inteiro.
And no country more important than Angola.
E em África nenhum país é mais importante que Angola.
And President Lorenzo, who's been shifting Angola away from Chinese influence and now shifting closer to the U.S., praised President Biden today for, quote, opening a new page in U.S.-Africa relations. Meanwhile, there were concerns, however, about African countries feeling neglected by the United States, as it seems like President Biden is set to break his promise earlier that he's going to visit Africa by the end of this year. Biden today, however, did promise that he's going to go back to Angola, though he didn't specify when. Steve.
Certainly a lot on President Biden's plate with two wars that the U.S. is heavily involved in, if not directly but indirectly. So what is the White House saying about Israel today as the truce in Gaza gets extended to a seventh day now, Iris?
So the White House is welcoming that, saying that it actually like to see this truce getting extended by another 1, 2, or 3 days. Meanwhile, the White House also emphasizes that when Israel resumes fighting after the temporary pause in fighting, the White House will continue to have its back. Watch.
That they will continue to have United States support as they go after these terrorists. And again, just look at what happened today in Jerusalem. I mean, if anybody's guessing and wondering whether Hamas still has murderous intentions against the Israeli people, just look at what happened in Jerusalem today.
And that, as you heard, is the White House condemning what it calls a terrorist attack today in Jerusalem by Hamas, where 3 people were shot. The White House today also again made clear that while it supports temporary pauses in fighting, it does not support a permanent ceasefire. Back to you.
NTD's Iris Tao reporting live from the White House. Iris, thank you. Tomorrow could be Representative George Santos' last day in Congress. The House is expected to vote on a resolution to expel him. The New York Republican faces charges of corruption and misusing campaign funds. Here's the congressman earlier this morning.
This is bullying. The chair of the committee putting out a motion to expel, just introducing it and not calling it privilege, was designed to force me to resign. The reality of it is it's all theater. It's theater for the cameras, it's theater for the microphones, it's theater for the American people at the expense of
the resolution to expel Santos requires a 2/3 majority in the House of Representatives. Santos has pleaded not guilty to federal charges of laundering campaign money for personal expenses. He's also accused of charging donor credit cards without permission. Santos says he will not be seeking re-election in 2024, but he's refusing to resign. 2 votes to expel Santos have already failed, but it's unclear whether he can survive this 3rd attempt. Almost 180 Republicans voted against expulsion on November 1st, but several have said they won't support the congressman the next time around. So should workers be forced to join a labor union or pay union dues in order to work? The House Employment, Labor, and Pensions Subcommittee holding a hearing earlier today on what's known as the right to work. Joining us now to discuss, we have Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Mark Mix, thank you so much for joining us.
Steve, pleasure to be on with you. This is an exciting day for us here at Right to Work.
Well, yeah, we're curious to get your thoughts. Obviously, today there was the hearing there, the Employment, Labor, and Pensions Subcommittee holding this hearing called Safeguarding Workers' Rights and Liberties. What are you expecting to result from this meeting?
Well, you know, things in Washington are a little gridlocked right now. If you're not part of the executive branch, you're probably not getting a whole lot done. But the fact is, Steve, this bill, a 1-page bill that doesn't add a single word to federal law, is something that should have been debated a long time ago. This addresses the issue of compulsory forced unionism written into the federal statutes way back in the 1930s. And this is the first time we've had a hearing specifically on this unique union power where they're able to force a worker to pay dues or fees in order to get or keep a job.
Now, the subcommittee chair there, Congressman Bob Good of Virginia, said this, forcing workers to pay union dues is wrong. We'll continue to combat Biden's big labor bias by curbing federal mandates, ending forced unionism, safeguarding economic liberty, and respecting the will of the people. What is your response to the congressman's statement?
Yeah, he's spot on, and that's exactly what the bill will do, again, by not adding a single word to federal law, simply reducing that Depression-era language that allowed union officials this privilege. And so, with that individual freedom, with that individual choice comes economic opportunity. There's no question that the right-to-work states in America today are leading the nation in new manufacturing job growth, private sector job growth, disposable income for workers in those states that have free choice when it relates to unionization. So he's spot on in his analysis, and today we got the word out about that, about the impact of individual liberty and freedom in America's workplace.
If you could just sort of simplify it for us, Mark, what is a right-to-work state?
Yeah, Steve, it is really simple. We believe that every worker should have the right to join and associate with the union if they choose to do so. But the law currently in 27 states, it'll be 26 probably at the beginning of next year as Michigan has repealed their right-to-work law. It is that simple. It says you have the right to join, associate, participate in a union any way you want to, but it will not contemplate the notion that you'd be fired from your job. You would lose your livelihood if you didn't pay dues or fees to a private organization for the right to work.
Mark, lastly, the congressman did cite 75% of Americans agree that workers should be able to decide whether to join or leave a labor union. He says in 24 states, as you mentioned, employees must pay union dues or be fired. What are you doing at the state level to work with lawmakers to change those laws to reflect what Americans want?
Yeah, we have a very robust state legislative program as well. Obviously with things the way they are in Washington, D.C., the Congress gave the states the right to outlaw the union shop back in 1947 under the Taft-Hartley Act. And so we have been working in state after state. We passed 5 new right-to-work laws in the last 12 years to continue that momentum. But ultimately, the problem is created right here in Washington, D.C. with federal labor policy. And so it's a dual track. We'll continue to work at the state level, but we obviously have to change the federal law because it's the federal law that imposes forced unionism on those 24 states that don't have right-to-work laws.
Mark Mix, we'll let you get back to work. Thank you.
We'll do it. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate the opportunity.
And coming up, a carefully guarded secret kept under tight seal by the federal government. Lawmakers today addressing pushback from the intel community against UAP disclosure. And housing illegal immigrants on federal land. Congress today deciding whether the government is allowed to spend taxpayer money on that. NTV's Arian Pazdar brings us a border update. That and more when we come back.
To a child, this is what conflict looks like. Children in Ukraine are caught in the crossfire of war, forced to flee their homes.
A steady stream of refugees has been coming across all day. It's bitterly cold.
Lacking clean water and sanitation, exposed to injury, hunger.
Exhausted and shell-shocked from what they've been through.
Every dollar you give can help bring a meal, a blanket, or simply hope to a child living in conflict. Please call or go online to givenowtosave.org today with your gift of $10 a month. That's just 33 cents a day. We cannot forget the children in places like Syria, born in refugee camps, playing in refugee camps, thinking of the camps as home. Please call or go online to givenowtosave.org today with your gift of $10 a month. Your gift can help children like Ara in Afghanistan, where nearly 20 years of conflict have forced the people into extreme poverty. Weakened and unable to hold herself up, Ara was brought to a Save the Children center where she was diagnosed and treated for severe malnutrition. Every dollar helps. Please call or go online to givenowtosave.org today with your gift of $10 a month, just 33 cents a day. And thanks to special government grants that are available now, every dollar you give can multiply up to 10 times the impact. And when you use your credit card, you'll receive this special Save the Children tote bag to show you won't forget the children who are living their lives in conflict. Every war is a war against children. Please, give now.
Welcome back to the Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. In Washington, D.C. today, Twitter Files journalists testifying. 1 year after the first Twitter Files report, 2 journalists returned for a House subcommittee hearing on the federal government's involvement in social media censorship. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards brings us more.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty?
Journalists involved in the so-called Twitter Files reports haven't spoken to Congress since March. But on Thursday, Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger gave testimony for the second time before a House subcommittee focused on government censorship. The subcommittee is re-examining the federal government's involvement in social media censorship, as well as what it calls attacks on independent journalism and free expression. Chair Jim Jordan kicked off the hearing by praising Taibbi and Schellenberger for exposing the Twitter Files. The Twitter Files are thousands of records of conversations between company employees about their content moderation decisions. CEO Elon Musk authorized the incremental release of the files in December 2022. Taibbi and Schellenberger posted discussions to highlight the company's decision-making process around some high-profile actions. Jordan said the journalists have been targeted for their efforts.
And when we first had Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Schellenberger testify back in March, an IRS agent showed up at Matt Taibbi's door, where I say, while they are testifying, while Mr. Taibbi is testifying in front of the committee about the weaponization of government, the IRS was actually at that very moment knocking on his door. And there's not one person who thinks that was just chance.
He said the committee has exposed other incidents of the federal government's attempts to censor Americans. Schellenberger said Homeland Security and the FBI were involved.
FBI agents were directly flagging content to Twitter saying this appears to violate your terms of service. What about this? What about that? Same thing with DHS staff. And then, of course, DHS created the Election Integrity Partnership, which then became the Virality Project, which was in the process of demanding mass censorship of America.
Democratic Representative Dan Goldman argued that only 13% of flagged content was removed.
So you see them constantly trying to change the terms of service. You see them, it was 35% of the URLs that were, this according to EIP, were labeled removed or soft blocked. That's all forms of censorship. That censorship is not just removal.
But 65% were not. So how can the government be so coercive?
Does the First Amendment say that the government
for the course on government efficiency?
Does the First Amendment say the government can censor 35%?
Time of the gentleman has expired. They're not censoring. They're flagging in the social media companies.
So under coercion,
35% of a First Amendment? Or?
It's not the First Amendment. It's the terms of service, as you said, and they are flagging it for the social media companies to make their own decisions. That is not the First Amendment. That is the terms of service.
At the conclusion of the hearing, the chair said he would like to continue having hearings about censorship and that he plans to invite the journalists to come back again. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Suspected terrorists entering the United States. Would a Trump border policy have prevented the current situation at our southern border? NTD's Arian Pazdar brings us the highlights from a hearing earlier today.
And our adversaries around the world are capitalizing on our open border policies. It only took 19 terrorists to perpetrate 9/11.
The House Foreign Affairs Committee on Thursday holding a hearing on the border crisis.
In total, since President Biden took office, we've had more than 7.5 million encounters at the southern border. This is the population of 9 states combined, and nearly 300 apprehensions of individuals on the terror watch list, compared to 14 under the previous administration.
Congressman Michael McCaul concluded by saying the Remain in Mexico policy would have prevented the current crisis. Also on Thursday, the House is scheduled to vote on a bill that would prohibit the use of federal funds to provide housing to specified aliens on federal lands. However, even if the House passes the bill, it will face an uphill battle. On Monday, the White House published a statement saying the administration strongly opposes the bill. And impeaching Homeland Security's Alejandro Mayorkas. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene is now again pushing her resolution for impeachment. This comes after last week the House decided not to vote on her resolution, but instead send it back to the committee. Also, a fellow Republican congressman previously indicated he doesn't consider all of Greene's resolutions.
I am not going to be thinking a lot about every privileged resolution that Marjorie Greene files.
Because?
Because we've got real work to do.
Green on Thursday said almost 10,000 illegal immigrants had entered the U.S. in the last 24 hours, indicating that's part of the reason she introduced articles of impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas again this week, asking, will Republicans impeach him this time? Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
What is the financial toll of illegal immigration? And what are the trends? And what are some of the cities that are being impacted across America? Joining us now to discuss, we have Kathleen Bush-Joseph, policy analyst at Migration Policy Institute. Kathleen Bush-Joseph, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Kathleen, I want to get your thoughts. Recent reports painting a relatively grim picture of the southern border, the financial cost on local and state governments, as well as the federal government, to transport tens of millions of these illegal immigrants with taxpayer funds, mind you. What can you tell us about the financial toll that this is taking?
Sure. Well, thanks for laying out a bit of the picture there, Steve. Just to maybe add a little bit more context, I think that it's important to note that we are working with an immigration system that was set up, decades ago, and the laws really haven't been updated since the 1990s by Congress. So a lot of what we're seeing today is a result of the inability to pass legislation updating our immigration system for the modern times. So with refugees, we have a system that was put in place in the 1980s that distributes refugees across the country to communities that are ready to receive them and that have been prepared with assistance. And the difference being that with migrants coming across the southwest border, be they asylum seekers or people coming to work, there is not a resettlement system in place or a distribution system in place to send migrants to communities that have job openings and the housing to be able to support them.
So what would you say are some of the strains that you're seeing on local communities and law enforcement agencies?
Communities are definitely facing strains, and one of the major takeaways from what's happening right now is that the arrival of migrants who do not have the same community ties that past groups arriving, past nationalities arriving largely from Central America or Mexico, they don't have the same connections that these more recent arrivals have, in some parts because of the fact that people are now coming from around the world and they're coming from different countries than we were seeing before. And so all of that has really exacerbated existing affordable housing crises within, these major urban areas such as New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. And so while, cities and states have put forward measures to, say, limit shelter stays to shorter time periods for recent migrant arrivals, there is not the affordable housing and support system in place to help migrants, start working and get off the ground.
So who is ultimately responsible for sealing the evidence related to UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs? On Capitol Hill today, several lawmakers saying their efforts in demanding transparency have been stonewalled by the intelligence community. NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
Since the 1940s, unidentified anomalous phenomenon, or UAPs, have been investigated by politicians and scientists alike. But to this day, much of the information regarding these possibly extraterrestrial aircraft remains tightly sealed. This year, a growing number of lawmakers have pushed for full disclosure surrounding the phenomena, but have repeatedly encountered roadblocks. According to Congressman Tim Burchett, the pushback has come not from any elected body, but rather from the intelligence community. Burchett has led several efforts demanding the full declassification of UAP information. That includes an amendment to this year's National Defense Authorization Act that would require the Defense Department to release all relevant materials that would not put national security at risk. Burchett said today that the issue ultimately comes down to transparency.
But why are we classifying so much about this, especially if the information doesn't jeopardize national security, and we have departments telling us that they do not exist?
Back in July, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer spearheaded legislation called the UAP Disclosure Act, but the bill has received a mixed response from both sides of the aisle. Congressman Burchett told me the concern is that the legislation would require an appointed panel to review all the classified materials.
The American public would have no control over it. It would be appointed by a politician. You'd know who would be on there. You'd have the missile defense companies. You'd have the usual cast of characters.
When asked about progress towards full disclosure, some House member told me that Congress is moving in the right direction.
Schumer's efforts here are probably the floor as to where we would like to see disclosure begin. Again, going back to just what we have faced, it shouldn't be the case that it is this complicated to release this information.
I think we're making a lot of progress. We just have to accept the fact that the pace here in Washington, that we're caught up in that same pace.
But it remains to be seen how soon declassification and disclosure will take place. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Sam Wong, NTD News.
That is all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. Thank you for watching. From the nation's capital, I'm Steve Lance. Have a nice evening. We'll see you back here tomorrow.